barbarians from the gate.
I got into the labor movement not because I wanted to negotiate wages. I got into the labor movement because I saw it as a vehicle to do massive social change to improve the lots of people.
Let's take these son of a out and give America back. Tell America where we belong. Thank you very much. Thank you.
As far as I'm concerned, the Tea Party can go straight to hell. I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. I am a real American. Fight for what's right. Fight for your life.
Welcome in Northern Michigan. You're listening to Your Defending Fathers. I'm Trucker Randy. Brian Summerfield will be back on Monday. And we're joined this hour, continuing our discussion with Norm Kammeraad, a small business owner, well, actually, maybe not so small, Southwest Michigan, had to move his offices to Ohio to avoid regulatory overreaching or licensing problems, got some tax breaks, could have had 100 jobs here in Michigan, good paying jobs. But he's now based out of Ohio. And actually, Norm, you were talking about you actually ended up working with Dave Agema, your state representative, to introduce a bill that repealed that licensing law. Why don't you pick it up right from there?
Yes, Dave actually contacted me when I was on Highway 250, just north of Wooster, Ohio. At the time, he asked me if I'd come in and help him draft legislation to repeal it because he felt that there was some fraud ongoing with the program. Well, this program apparently went bankrupt in 1996, and then this organization's members from Denver, Colorado, that were in the state, lobbied in another law under then Senator Warren Bennett, who was a Republican, I might add, to come in and reinstitute what's called Son of MUSFA, which was another program adding another $57 million of taxpayer money into the program. The problem with the whole scheme was that by that time, the department had legislative, what I call allies, friends, or businesses that were competitors of mine. There was only probably 12 or 15 of them that they would actually issue contracts to. They were claiming they were putting people on a list, but they were only delegating them out to various individuals. When we started getting into the act, we started also trying to get some background on what they were spending money on. Lo and behold, my colleague that worked in Dave Agema's office one time was just having lunch near the Capitol building, and he was sitting right next to a lady that was one of the Auditor General representatives, and they were talking about some of the legislative issues and stuff involving that act, and she overheard them and said, hey, I just got done auditing them. And he said, hey, could I have possibly an auditor report on that? And she said, no problem. What we found out is out of the $57 million that they were collecting in taxpayer monies, and this, by the way, folks, every time you fill up your car with gas, you're contributing to that fund, or you still even to this day, you're contributing to that tax. They found that there was over $42 million of that funding, of that $57 million, that was going into nothing but slush fund issues, which was basically renting out 300 acres from one individual for a hunting party. It was different organizational meets and stuff where they'd maybe go out of state and give themselves a free vacation and stuff. It was just absolutely mind-blowing.
Now, are you talking about that particular department, or are you talking about state senators and state representatives, governors, and folks like that were participating in that?
It was that particular department.
So that department alone had their own $42 million slush fund to party it up on our dime.
That is correct. That's what was happening, and only $7 million was actually going in to cleaning up orphan sites, or what they like to call sites where they've had underground tanks, the owner went bankrupt, left the state, or whatever, had no owner. And they were having to use that. They were only using $7 million of that to clean up, which, by the way, folks, is a violation of the Headley Amendment, When you get a fund that's designated under a tax by law, that money has to be designated specifically for that under Headley. And that was also being violated, which is why this whole system is just incredibly corrupted as a result of it. But there again, that brings up the issue for a part-time legislature.
Right. We're going to go to a short break, and when we get back, I want to focus on that statement right there. Why we need a part-time legislature to be restored in Michigan. How will it affect these bureaucratic departments? We're talking with Norm Kammeraad, and you're listening to Your Defending Fathers. We'll be right back. Thanks for listening today. TGIF, it's Friday. You're listening to Your Defending Fathers. I'm Chucker Randy, and we're joined by Norm Kammeraad this hour. And I appreciate you staying on, Norm, while we're waiting for our next gentleman guest to come on. You basically were successful in getting this licensing law repealed, but through that process, you had firsthand experience in fighting our state government, using taxpayer dollars to come after your business and to cause you all kinds of legal hassles and problems. You became very learned in understanding the legislative process, the legal process. Why don't you tell our audience basically what has then, as a result of all that, led you to do an act today regarding part-time legislature? Why did you get through that process? What was your thinking?
Well, first of all, Randy, when I was helping Representative Dave Adjma produce these bills to repeal these laws, I had the privilege of standing on the floor of the House at one time with Dave, watching some of the process taking place. Now, Dave Adjma has got to be one of the most incredibly knowledgeable representatives that I've ever known in my lifetime. But one of the things I noted when we were on the floor of the House, and this was during, Snyder had just gotten elected, our current Governor Snyder, and we were going into the 11th hour of the Granholm administration. He was on the floor, and I began watching some of this kind of take shape in its early stages, where he was watching these bills that they were proposing coming off, and they literally assembly lined them right down to the 11th hour. And he said this was incredible. He's never seen anything like this, where these bills were just coming in one right after the other, and they're voting them into play, voting them into play, voting them into play. And as it was taking place, I said, they're not even reading what they're voting on. Many of those representatives in there weren't even knowledgeable on a lot of the bills that were taking place. That is a huge quagmire in the making. And I recognized then there was no longer a citizen-driven aspect to the legislation that was in there, because if our representatives don't know about it, we surely don't know about it, because they represent us.
And as a result, they were basically, without having actually read the bill or even know truly what it was about, they were basically, in my opinion, maybe it was simply a matter of a lobbyist coming in with a check for a donation to their campaign saying, we want you to vote yes on HB 4111. They didn't even read the bill. They didn't even know what it was about. They just had their list there handed to them, probably by a legislative aide or a chief of staff, and said, here's the bill numbers on the agenda today, and this is how you're going to vote.
That's correct. We had one bill come through involving the BEA standards, which I actually caught through the corner of my eye. And during the time, Dave's on the floor. Bear in mind, this is a 2-hour process. I was fortunate enough to get a hold of his legislative aide in Lansing and ask him to quick look up the background on that bill. Well, guess what? It had a licensure scheme attached to it. And at that time, it was being pushed by 2 Republican legislators. Again, bear in mind, the licensure scheme that I dealt with was introduced by a Republican legislator over in Brighton. This one was actually being sponsored by one out of my district. And when I started looking at it, I said to Dave, you've got to garnish as many votes as you can to block this, because what it did was require anyone who wanted to purchase real estate and open up a business to have to use, again, another licensed consultant to go in and start doing what's called a baseline environmental assessment, which is just going to take the real estate market and crash it. Well, Dave was able to garnish the votes and get it on the floor and stop it. That, Randy, was just one bill in a Googleplex that was flowing off this assembly line.
Well, we are the second most regulated state in the country. The only state higher, more laws or regulations on the books is the state of California.
Yeah, and they have a full-time legislature too, mind you.
Yeah, absolutely. They are down to 4 states. 46 out of 50 states have a part-time or a quasi-part-time state legislature. Only 4 states in the country, California, Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania, still have a full-time legislature.
Exactly.
Last year, there was 559 votes, roll call votes on the board where they had to push a red or a green button. 559 in the House, 655 in the Senate, where they actually did a roll call vote. Some of the bills and a lot of the resolutions were a voice vote, where they didn't even have to push a button.
That is correct.
One of the things that I wanted to have you on specifically, now all of this past experience, this business experience, and dealing with Lansing and fighting these governors and bureaucratic agencies, you at some point made a decision that in talking with Dave Agerman, because I know Dave has introduced it in the past and it never went anywhere, to implement and restore back to a part-time legislature. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about that history with you and Dave Agerman?
Well, Dave, after we repealed the act regarding my issue, Dave actually approached me and says, Norm, I have already tried this now several times, and I had some experience at doing referendums. And in the past, most of the time it was with local counties and so on, but I was familiar with the process. Dave asked me to get involved and possibly develop a committee to restore Michigan's part-time legislature. Now, we had a part-time legislature. Not too many people know this, but we had a part-time legislature in our state up until 1963. At that time, George Romney, who is Mitt Romney's father, Mitt Romney, the gentleman that ran for president and lost against Obama, he instituted this. Well, the more I studied it, the reason why, the history why, because I like to get into something's history. You know, it's kind of like fixing a car. You want to know what's broken so that you know how to fix it. It became very evident to me that George Romney, when he passed the part-time, or went from a part-time legislature to full-time legislature, when he pushed this full-time legislature scheme we live under today, it was to try to get these representatives in one location near him where he could get his hands around them and influence them. That became evident to me that it was no longer citizen-driven. At that point, it had gone from a citizen-driven, people in the district saying, we want you to do what we want, to the executive control of the governor wants you to do something, and who cares what your representatives think?
And then 30 years fast forward, under another Republican governor, John Engler, he basically put that full-time legislature on steroids.
That's exactly correct. That became evident to me, and then what really climaxed this whole thing is when Jennifer Granholm wanted the Michigan sales tax on services so bad that she said to the legislature, and Dave was part of this, he was in the legislature when this happened, she ordered the sergeant at arms to lock in our representatives into that building in Lansing. That is what really pushed me over the edge. When I watched our very representatives, the people who represent us, imprisoned behind 4 walls with a sergeant at arms until they gave Jennifer what she wanted, and thank the good Lord she didn't get it. They did resolve the budget during that year, but she didn't get what she wanted. And in the process, I said, yes, I will take this on. At that time, we met with two other individuals, myself and Mike Cross and Jim Chiodo, and they questioned me, what should we do? I said, we need to form a committee. This needs to be done officially through a committee, and we need to start looking at the laws and how they're applied by the legislative aspect for a full-time legislature, and we need to go revisit our roots. We need to bring this back into the district, get these people back here, get their skin in this game. The other thing, Randy, and I've got to say this, I could not believe the amount of pay they were getting for the time they were there. 85 days, roughly, is the time that they're actually in the legislature. Now, one would argue, they're, looking at building laws and stuff like that. I was there. They're not producing these laws. Basically, they have lobbyists coming in and proposing these laws, and they simply send them into the Legislative Service Bureau and say, hey, make that a law. What I experienced, I said, wow, we've got to stop this. We've got to get this back to our roots where we're developing this in the field, much like you see today when somebody says, I want to have a wetlands permit. Let's hold a public meeting in the drainage district where we're going to have the wetlands. I said, if we're going to develop a law with a legislator, we need to readopt that format and have that legislator in the district with us so that we're telling him what we think of that law. That's the beautiful thing about our proposal, is we're bringing that back.
So bottom line is, these guys will not just be housed in one building in the Capitol building with all the lobbyists renting the office spaces around the Capitol, coming in there, putting a check down on the table for their re-election campaign, saying, here's the bill we want you to introduce. They hand it to LSB and say, here, capitulate it to code, turn it into a blue back, I'll introduce it, we'll get through committee, we'll get it assigned to a favorable committee, out of committee, onto the floor, give it to the Senate, have somebody sponsor it over there. I mean, this is like a $500,000 process per bill that lobbyists is basically writing for these guys and saying, here, turn this into a law, here's a check.
Yeah, and bear in mind, just on that note, I actually requested an FOI from the Legislative Service Bureau. How many bills were introduced in 2008 under Jennifer Granholm? There was 1,800 bills, 1,800 laws that went into place, and each one of those bills, on average, costs a little over $500,000 to the taxpayer to produce. That's $900 million that they are spending just to produce paper in that town. Now, as long as these legislators, as I said before, are there only 85 days, they're getting over $100,000 in combined salary and benefits for being there during that time. They don't care. They're not going to care. And that's why I said we need to change the mindset of the legislature. Get the salaries down to a 60-day time frame, which is $35,000 per year. Now, for most folks, that's $15,000 a month. That's pretty good money. That's also the median income of most Michiganders. I had one legislator say, I can't live on that. Well, guess what? I told him, I says, well, if the rest of the state, the majority of it can live on it, so can you. And if that ain't good enough, I'll give you a copy of the want ads out of the press this week, and you can live on that, like the rest of us are doing. We have to get their skin in this game so when they invoke a law, they're living with it.
Absolutely. We're going to continue after the news break, bottom of the hour, coming up. Norm Kammeraad, we're going to be talking about the specific language and what his proposal will do to our state government in Lansing when we get back. You're listening to Your Defending Fathers. We'll be right back.
Too many broken hearts are falling in the river. Too many lonely souls have drifted out to sea. You lay your beds and then...
TGIF, Northern Michigan, it's Friday. You're listening to Your Defending Fathers. We're on with Norm Kammeraad. We're talking this morning about why does Michigan need to restore its part-time legislature in Lansing? And Norm, I appreciate you being on for as long as you have been. Our other guest is having mechanical failure this morning and having to deal with a gasoline truck. So appreciate you staying on. But I think it's important because you have given our audience a background as to why you have decided to get involved in this effort. Why don't you talk about your logic and your reason for it?
Well, the logic is, Randy, is that we are not represented in Lansing like we think we are. I think that is the biggest issue here. In order for somebody to be represented, they have to go there with, like a melting pot. A representative actually serves as a melting pot for its district. And then he goes to Lansing and presents that melting pot, the majority of the concerns there. We don't have that in Michigan. What we have is a melting pot for lobbyists. This whole issue is not about, Governor Snyder. It's not about the current. Legislative, action is measured like the weather. It's measured in decades. Its impact is always measured in decades. We have watched, at least I have in my life now, I've watched literally the automotive industry pull out of Michigan in large part. You don't see GM saying, let's set up shop here and let's just totally put everything we've got in Michigan. You don't see that happening with a lot of the other factories, refrigerator factories. You don't see that. One of the largest companies that pulled out of probably your listeners' region is Dura Automotive.
They were based right here, I believe, in Mansalona, Antrim County.
Correct. I was familiar with that whole incident as it occurred. Jennifer Granholm was sitting here saying how she just was negotiating with every company they had in Michigan, a large company that had a lot of manufacturers like that. And bear in mind, while this is going on, I'm also watching other companies in Detroit doing this, because at that time I was actually working for Lehman Brothers as a consultant. And I constantly, every time I'd come up to a company and I'd say, what is your biggest issue here? They'd always look at me and say, taxes, regulation. I'm having to pay lawyers. I'm having to sit here and pay property taxes, personal property taxes. He says, I've already bought this stuff. And Dura went through the same issue. They're paying taxes. I think the GM stamping plant in Wyoming down by me here. The last issue I heard as far as biggest pullbacks they had was the fact they're paying over $1.25 million in local property tax. This all came about as a result of Proposal A being established, where if you're a non-homestead entity, meaning that you don't have your homestead tied to the property that's adjoining with you, you're going to be taxed twice as much as the local resident that would be there. Now, it sounds good to all of us to have our taxes lowered and so on, right up until the point where the company that you're depending on for your livelihood to pay your taxes pulls up stakes like Dura Automotive and they move to Mexico. That begins a whole new issue of problems. It was phenomenal. I watched Mansalona deteriorate financially as a result of that company pulling out, and they literally had to go back to their own unions and say, listen, in order for us to continue with the amount of taxational burden that we have on us, we have to have a cut here in salary and a cut in benefits. Well, think about it. Your listeners are thinking, why should I be taxed more? But in reality, they already lost not only the benefits that a lot of these companies had to detract because of having to pay these taxes, but in many cases like Dura, the people lost their jobs. They lost the very ability to sustain themselves.
Well, the union at that point responded in trying to protect their workers' wages and benefits, doing, what a union does. They basically came back and said, sorry, we can't make any cuts. We're not going to take any concessions, and as a result of, like you're saying, all these taxes and all these regulations on Dura, when the unions finally rejected their offer, they opened up their books, they showed them how much cash flow they had, they showed them how much they could afford to pay the workers. The unions flat out said, we don't care, we're not going to do it, didn't let the workers vote on it. The union bosses did it, and basically Dura said, that's it, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, we're out of here.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. They had no choice. With the amount of regulatory expense that they were having to bear, and they could no longer meet the needs of the union members. Again, none of this, in my mind, would have occurred had that company had far easier workings with the state, as my company did, to continue operations there.
Less regulations, less taxes. They would have been able to continue paying the workers the living wage and benefits they had they not had so much problems from the government side.
That is correct. And all of this is culminated out of this massive growth in government that we had since the 1960s when we adopted a full-time legislature. The problem is, Randy, is you get into a situation where a congressional member, in this case the state representative, is trying to make himself re-electable by passing numerous bills and thinking he's doing good, when in reality he's detracting from the very society for which he represents. It's the logic in Lansing that's screwed up. When you have to literally protect your career as a politician versus representing your district, that's where we started screwing up under this George Romney full-time legislative scheme. So from that standpoint, I could see, and I said this to Dave Agema, we're going to have to reverse the mindset in Lansing. We have to change the man. You can send anybody you want into that legislature, but if they're making $100,000, they're being bombarded by lobbyists to try to maintain that lifestyle. You're going to continue to have this no matter who you put there. Bear in mind, there's Republicans and Democrats both responsible for this.
Yep.
So I said, from that standpoint, we need to change the man. We need to bring him back to the very roots which our forefathers had intended, and that's to be there part-time.
Bottom line is, the language is drafted. It's been being finalized today by the corporate attorney. It's going to be formatted into a petition. And bottom line, this language does what? As far as collecting signatures and putting it on the ballot, what does this language actually do? There's
very few basics to it. But what it does is, one, it takes their pay and brings it out of this absolutely irresponsible level of $100,000 a year for being there only 85 days. And it restarts it. We virtually are pulling the clock back to 63 and then bringing it forward as if it would have been under a part-time legislature from that time to today to $35,000 a year.
And they will be restricted because this is a constitutional amendment to the state's constitution, that pay will be limited to $35,000 as total compensation. And what does it do as far as restricting the calendar days for when they can be in legislative session?
They can only be there 60 days, starting in the first week of January, ending near the first week of March. And here's the other bullet point. They're only there to vote on legislation, not create it. They're going to be creating the legislation back in the districts in front of us. And the lobbyists at this point, and this is what we found with these other states that have actually adopted a part-time legislature, the lobbyists are going to literally lose more than 70% of their effect on a lot of the bills that are being introduced. Now, somebody once told me, aren't you going to slow things down? You bet. That's what I'm attempting to do with this, is try to get it so that the citizens have an ability to absorb what is being proposed and have input on what's being proposed. And it literally makes the process more citizen-driven, which is what it should have been from 1963 forward.
And bottom line, their first constitutional obligation per Michigan's Constitution that you're not amending in this proposal is that they have to prepare, finalize, and give it to the governor a budget to operate the state.
That is correct.
That's going to be their first priority. So once they get through the budget process, then they may end up only having 15, 20, 30 days, depending on how fast they get through the budget process, to actually deal with repealing, hopefully, as opposed to passing new laws.
That is correct. And here's the beautiful thing about it. They're going to look at repealing unnecessary regulation a lot more seriously, especially given the fact that their livelihood is going to be dependent on that. Right now, they have this insulation. Whatever I do, it ain't going to affect me. I've got $100,000 in combined salary and benefits. That's all going away. They're going to now be totally 100% dependent on the very economy they regulate. And that budget issue is going to be the climax, funding the necessary roads and bridges that we need to have, funding the necessary services, police protection, and so on. That's going to become what it should have been, their priority.
Funding the schools, funding the prisons, taking care of the roads and the infrastructure, and then dealing with whatever time they have left for the rest of it.
Correct.
That's their constitutional obligations outlined in Michigan's Constitution. This does not change any of that. What you're doing is just getting it back to the part-time legislature it was back in 1963.
That's correct. I want to emphasize to your listeners, this is not a movement against Governor Snyder. It never was intended to be that. It's really about us. It's about us being represented in a governmental process by which it was originally intended to be for. We have to take part in our government because that without question, is important, and the government has to be made receptive. I believe all of your listeners want to be part of this, and they want to take part in their government. They want to be part of what happens in Lansing. But right now, the way the system's set up, they have to go to Lansing and try to get beyond the sergeant-at-arms, in some cases behind closed caucus doors, to try to get access to this.
Right. We're going to finish the last segment with Norm Kammeraad. We're talking about part-time legislature, and somebody that's actually running for office is going to be joining us in a three-way conversation. We'll be right back. We're back. TGIF, it's Friday. You're listening to Your Defending Fathers, Trucker Randy with Norm Kammeraad. And Norm, I'm going to dial the phone right now to Tristan Cole. He's a candidate running for the 105th State House seat. He's a truck driver. He delivers gasoline here in northern Michigan, and he's out working today. And we've had him on the show before talking about this issue of part-time legislature. And I want to get his perspective. Just so you know, he is a farmer, just like your background, and growing up with your dad's farm. Tristan is a farmer too, but in the winter months, you know, we got 2 feet of snow up here in Antrim County, so he's supplementing his income as a truck driver. But anyway, you were talking about this language, and we're going to have to get it on the ballot via a signature drive, correct?
That is correct. We're going to need a minimum, Randy. That means at least 360,000 signatures. We're going to have some buffering on that, so that will put it up to around 400,000 plus signatures that we're going to have to get this on the ballot.
Okay. Well, one of the things that wanted to understand that the signatures will just put it on the ballot for November's general election of 2014. It'll be very simply a question, should Michigan implement a part-time legislature? Yes or no? So if people are listening and they support this, they would be voting yes then. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'd like you to refer to, because really, do they want to restore their former part-time legislature?
Very good.
That's what we're doing here.
Great. I got the right phone number now, and we've been joined by Tristan Cole. He's a candidate for the 105th State House seat. Tristan, for the last hour and a half, I've been talking with Norm Kammeraad. He's the chairman for the Committee to Restore Michigan's Part-Time Legislature. And as a candidate yourself, going to be hopefully elected to the State House, how do you feel about coming in as a new legislator, possibly operating in January 2015 under a part-time legislature?
Well, I think it'll be very positive for the voters of Michigan, and it'll give more time for us as elected officials to spend with constituents back in the district. I think it's very positive.
One of the things that this does is it amends the state constitution where you guys can only be in session for 60 consecutive calendar days, starting the second Wednesday in January, going to roughly March 14th. You'd have to get a budget passed, and then once that's passed over to the governor, then you guys could repeal laws or possibly amend laws, pass new laws, but you'd only have, if you took weekends off, you'd only have really 45 legislative days, 9 work weeks, Monday through Friday, to get your work done. Do you think you can get it done in that time?
Oh, absolutely, Randy. We need to stick to the basics and restore the original functions of government, which is basically, paving the way for the private sector to create jobs and set that stage, let the private sector do its work. And I think, if we get the budget done and we repeal some bad legislation and remove some regulation upon the citizens of Michigan, I think we'll be doing a great job. And if we get a chance to maybe enact some new legislation, that'll be fine, and that would come directly from the citizens, from working with constituents. And, I think there would have to be a lot of teamwork outside of those 60 days in order to have a chance of passing a new bill through the legislature.
So while you guys are back in district 9.5 months out of the year, living and working, having another job to supplement and pay your bills, because you're going to be reduced down to $35,000, you'd basically be interacting with your constituents throughout the rest of the year and getting input from them.
Absolutely, which is the key role of the government, and one of the reasons I'm running is I feel that a lot of elected officials have lost touch with the general working population.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you joining us. Apologize for you having mechanical problems and not being able to join us earlier, but people need to know your website, Tristan, for your candidate race. Why don't you give that?
That's it. It's TristanCole.com, TristanCole.com. And I did just put some new family photos up on my Facebook page. Go to Facebook, like my personal page, and then go over and like my state representative page. Follow me there, share with your friends, and jump on board. Things are going great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Okay, Tristan, we appreciate it. Norm, I'm going to give the website out for Part-Time Legislature. That's parttimemi.com, and that has a lot of information and actually a video. If you want to see what Norm looks like, go to that parttimemi.com website and take a look at it and see Norm's ugly face right there.
Yeah, you may see Elvis. You never know.
Elvis with a mustache.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks so much, Norm, for being on.
It's been a pleasure being with you, Randy. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
We're done. Here, please, Jeff Nixon, thank you for
This is the Patriot Voice Radio Network.